Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Setting Up in Spain, Legal and Payroll Essentials. My name is Patricia Rodriguez. I'm the head of Payroll and Accounting Services at Lexidy, and I will be moderating today's session. Thanks so much for joining us. This is the first of two sessions designed to help entrepreneurs and international professionals understand how to set up and manage a business in Spain. Today we will look at the legal process of setting up a company in Spain and the main payroll and compliance points to keep in mind. Our next session will take place on November 6th, focusing on taxation, accounting, and financial management. Before we start, let me briefly tell you about Lexidy. Lexidy is an international law firm that helps companies, professionals and investors with their national and cross-border operations. We are based in Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, Greece, and Mexico, and supporting clients who want to expand or manage their business internationally. Our strength lies in combined technology, a strong legal expertise, and a multilingual and globally minded team of lawyers, allowing us to deliver efficient, agile, and client-focused solutions. We work on their digital-first model, and we offer an integrated service covering corporate law, taxation, accounting, labor, immigration, real estate, global mobility, and litigation. So clients have everything they need under one roof. And now let me introduce our speakers. First, we have Madeleine Cadwell, is one of our corporate lawyers who supports international companies setting up in Spain. And joining her is Andrea Rubio, payroll specialist, who will share the essential of payroll and labor compliance. You can send your questions in the chat, anytime, and we will cover them at the end during 20 minutes Q&A session, okay? Well, Madeleine, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining, and thank you Patricia for the introduction. So I'm going to start from a corporate point of view. We're going to discuss different legal structures for having a business in Spain. We're going to discuss the process of incorporating the most common legal structure, which is the limited liability company, Sociedad Limitada in Spain. And then also we are going to go over possible visas for coming to Spain with the business. So first of all, regarding the types of entities, we can structure them into three, basically. First, you have the freelancer, which is obviously one person operating a business without a real legal structure, simply registering with Social Security. Second, we have the limited liability company, or Sociedad Limitada. This is the most commonly used entity in Spain, and it's ideal for startups and small and medium enterprises, as well as bigger companies, although sometimes they do tend to go for the public company, so the Sociedad Anónima, in the event that they're going to go into the stock market. Lastly, we have branch or subsidiary, where basically there's a foreign entity involved. As a branch, it's as an extension of the mother company, and as a subsidiary, it's as a shareholder of a Spanish Sociedad Limitada, so limited liability company. Regarding the differences, basically an autónomo, as I mentioned, is just one individual operating, and it's the quickest way to start. It is the quickest registration process. However, the income is taxed as personal income tax, not as corporate income tax, and also liability is not limited. Liability is not limited to the business assets, but it also goes over the personal assets. Regarding the limited liability company, it takes a little bit longer to register, and it has more complex ongoing obligations than autónomo. However, the liability is limited to the company's assets, so that provides a lot of security for shareholders. Lastly, for a branch or subsidiary, these are normal structures when a foreign company is looking to expand into Spain, whether it's a branch or a subsidiary. Again, liability comes into play. For a subsidiary, liability is limited to the company's assets, and for a branch, liability can travel back to the mother company. So this is also something to take into account. The process, we're going to go over mainly the incorporation of a limited liability company, whether as a subsidiary or as a new company with individuals as shareholders. So these are the main steps for incorporating a company in Spain, an SL in Spain. First of all, you'll need to get all identification numbers for shareholders and directors. So these are the NI numbers. They're just identification numbers for foreigners. If you ever then decide to reside in Spain, then they would be your identification numbers while you reside in Spain as well. And also the NIF number is basically a tax identification number, which is used also for foreign companies looking to incorporate a company in Spain. So those are two of the most important first steps to get the NIE number or NIF number. After that, we would need to get the company name certificate, which is requested here in Spain, and draft the bylaws. With these documents, we're able to prepare the incorporation deed, which is signed before a Spanish notary, and send that deed to the commercial registry for registration. This is one of the longest steps in the process because the commercial registry has around 15 working days to register the company, and they do use that time frame. Some registries can be slightly faster, but generally in registries such as Barcelona, Madrid, Balearic Islands, the 15 working day time frame is used. Once the company is incorporated, we request the definitive NIF number for the Spanish company, which will be the Spanish company's VAT number. And then we proceed to obtaining the digital signature, registering with the tax agency, and opening the bank account. For all of these steps, the normal time frame is 6 to 8 weeks. This can be slightly reduced, for example, if the shareholders and directors already have an NIE number, or it can be slightly increased if there's any delays in providing documentation or any unforeseen issue with the commercial registry. Regarding the whole process from Lexidy, we do handle steps A to Z through a power of attorney. So it means that you do not have to actually travel to Spain, even with the bank account, unless there's a specific bank that you like. Normally we work with Banco Santander, and they do offer flexible solutions to be able to open the bank account remotely. But if there's any other bank that you would prefer to work with, we can't guarantee that the director's presence won't be required in Spain. Regarding the documents needed for the process, these are some of the ones that we already mentioned, basically NIE or NIF numbers, again, identification numbers for foreign directors and shareholders, whether they're individuals or companies, the company name certificate, bank account, of course, will be the last step, and the bylaws, which we help draft. These documents will go together in the deed that we prepare with the notary. At the end, once the company is registered, we will also have a commercial registry registration certificate. And lastly, we would have the NIF and tax registration. But from the client perspective, all we would need is the NI numbers. If you don't have them, then we help you obtain them with passports. Everything else we can do on your behalf. For relocation matters, we're gonna divide the structure a bit between employee relocation or company owner relocation. There are big differences whether we go for one or the other. Basically, in Spain, there are quite strict rules to whether you're considered an employee or you're considered a business owner, and you have different immigration paths depending on this. So if you're considered a business owner, you have mainly two types of visas. It would be the entrepreneur visa and the business activity visa. The difference between these two is that the entrepreneur visa is basically targeting tech entities, so entities that are bringing an innovative activity to Spain that's going to generate jobs and is going to generate, tech advancements in Spain. And the business activity visa is for every other type of business. This doesn't mean that a tech company cannot apply for a business activity visa. It just means that a generic company, for example, that will be trading or be a consulting firm cannot request an entrepreneur visa. Another interesting difference is that the entrepreneur visa, to be approved, first we'll need a positive report from ENISA. ENISA is a public entity in Spain that is in charge of verifying whether a business project is innovative enough to be able to be considered important for Spain, and therefore justify the need for the founders to be able to come to Spain and live in Spain and obtain a visa to be able to live and work here. The business visa, the business activity visa, is requested to normal immigration authorities. You do need a business plan. It is a bit more complex, and you do need to prove that there is going to be a real business activity. So you can't just, have a simple business plan and hope for the best. It needs to be that everything is in place and you're taking active steps to be able to start the business activity as soon as you have the visa. So this is very important as well. On the other hand, for the employee visas, we have the highly qualified professional and the intra-company visa. So basically the difference is that the intra-company means that you're going to be transferred from a different entity within the same group. So for example, if a company in the US incorporates a subsidiary in Spain, and then there's an employee in the US who has a manager position, who has a lot of knowledge of the business and would be a really big asset to the company in Spain to get started, then you can request an intra-company transfer visa where this employee will be transferred temporarily to the company in Spain. By temporarily, it means that the intra-company visa is not thought to be a long-term visa solution. So usually it's up to a maximum of 2 years. The highly qualified professional visa, on the other hand, is focused on, as the name says, highly qualified professionals who are going to be employed by the company in Spain directly. So in this case, it's a new employment relationship with the Spanish company directly. It's not a transfer from another company. So the previous employment relationship this employee had will disappear, and a new one will be generated with the company in Spain. There are some requirements. Either you need to prove that you have relevant higher education. So for example, university degree, master's degree, something like this, that will justify the need for the visa and the need for the specialist, or you need to prove relevant experience in the field, normally around 3 years or more. And there's also minimum requirements for salaries, which is from 40,000 to 55,000 euros a year, depending on the role. For these visas also, one of the things I mentioned before is that Spain has very strict rules when it comes to what is considered an employee and what is considered a business owner. In this case, the main difference is whether the person has control of the company. What do we mean by control of the company? Basically, that you have 25% or more of the shares and have a management role or are a director of the company. Otherwise, that you have more than 33% of the shares individually or more than 50% of shares with a family member. So if you comply with these requirements, that automatically means that you cannot be an employee in Spain, and therefore will have to be looking at business visas instead of employee visas. This structure can also affect the Beckham law regime, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which is the beneficial tax regime of being taxed as a non-resident while you are a resident in Spain during 6 years. So this is why it's very important to be able to consult with a professional and make sure that you're getting the right structure for you to be able to obtain the Beckham law regime, the correct visa, and the correct corporate structure. Regarding having the control of a company, if you do reside in Spain, and if you do have the control of a company, you cannot be an employee, and therefore there is a need to register as a corporate freelancer with Spanish Social Security, which will then mean that you will be paid in a specific way and receive remuneration in a specific way. Even if you're not looking to be paid for your role as director or to be paid as a shareholder in the Spanish company, you will still need to be registered as a corporate freelancer because of this control. Now my colleague Andrea will explain the ways of remuneration for shareholders, directors.
Thank you, Madeleine. Well, as Madeleine mentioned, whether the individual receives a salary or remuneration from the company is irrelevant. However, there are cases where they do receive a compensation for the role. Therefore, on the screen, you can see a table summarizing the different ways company directors or shareholders can be remunerated in Spain. The key point to understand here is that not all payments are treated the same. The classification of incomes depends on whether the individual acts as an administrator, performs executive functions, or work for the company as a professional or business partner. When it comes to administrators, the remuneration they receive is for fulfilling the legal role of an administrator. The compensation for these tasks is always is always considered employment income, which means that the company must pay them a monthly salary. When shareholders or administrators performs executive or management roles, the remuneration is also considered employment income and is paid through a monthly salary. However, in these cases, an ordinary withholding tax rate is applicable. When we are referring to only shareholders, not administrators, we have to distinguish between when they are engaged in business activity or professional activity. And in both cases, two situations may arise. If they work within the company structure, the compensation is considered employment income, and the company pays them a compensation through a payroll. However, if the shareholder provides services outside the company, this compensation is considered business income. And in this case, shareholders must issue invoices to their own company. Okay, then for employment setup, we will cover the different type of hiring options, provide basic overview of labor law, and discuss onboarding compliance as well as ongoing compliance that companies must fulfill. To start with, it is important to mention that when setting up an employment relationship in Spain, it is essential to distinguish between the three possible arrangements. The first one is the employee relationship, which is the standard employment set up under the Spanish labor law. In this model, the worker is hired as an employee and becomes part of the company's organizational structure, and the employer exercises control and is responsible for paying a monthly salary and withholding taxes and social security contributions, as well as complying with labor regulations. The contractor model applies when the person performs their work autonomously, using their own resources. In this model, contractors issue invoices for their services and are responsible for paying their own social security and taxes. This model is often suitable for short-term collaborations or specialized services. However, companies must be cautious, since if the contractor work looks too much like that of an employee, the relationship could be reclassified as an employment by the Labor Inspectorate with significant penalties. The last assignment is the international one, which applies when an employee of a foreign company is temporarily relocated to Spain. In these cases, the person remains employed by their home company, but may also need to be employed and registered, might also need to be registered in Spanish Social Security, depending on the duration of the assignment. This model is common for multinational companies relocating staff for expansion or project management purposes, and usually requires coordination among immigration, tax, and labor teams. Okay, now that we've seen all the main employment structures, let's see the basic labor law overview. To start with, it's important to highlight that every employment relationship in Spain must be formalized through a written employment contract, and it must specify the key conditions of the relationship. And in Spain, its employment system is known for being highly protective with employees, establishing minimum standards in areas such as those that we are going to see now. The first one of these areas is working hours. The Workers' Statute establishes that the maximum regular working time is 40 hours per week, and the daily maximum limit is set in 9 hours. Also, it is mandatory that all companies must keep a daily record of working hours, specifying the start and end of each workday. Finally, as of 2025, the Spanish government has proposed a reduction of the legal working week from 40 to 37.5 hours without any reduction in salary. And although the reform is still under parliamentary debate, many collective bargaining agreements already include working hours close to this limit. Another area is the minimum wage. For 2025, it is set at 1,184 euros per month, paid in 40 installments. However, it's important to note that most employees earn above this threshold, as salaries are determined by the collective bargaining agreement, and therefore the company is obliged to pay the salaries set forth in the collective bargaining agreement. Okay, thanks. The next area is vacations. Employees in Spain are entitled to a minimum of 30 calendar days of vacations per day. And it's important to note that vacations cannot be replaced by financial compensation. This means that if employees at the end of the day haven't taken these minimum 30 days in this year, the company cannot compensate them with money instead. The last area is the probation period. The duration of the probation period is not fixed by law, but it must be expressly stated in the employment contract in accordance with the provisions of the collective bargaining agreement. And which is important to note is that during this probation period, either party can terminate the contract without notice or severance. With all this in mind, it's essential to understand the role of the collective bargaining agreement in Spain, as it is the primary legal instrument governing employment relationships. This is because it determines the minimum mandatory conditions that must be respected in every employment relationship, and any aspect not covered by the collective bargaining agreement is governed by the Workers' Statute. Therefore, before hiring or drafting an employment contract, it is crucial to identify the applicable collective bargaining agreement. Okay, at this point, the company should be fully set up in Spain, and now it's time to start hiring employees. But before being able to do so, there are several important compliance steps to follow. The first one is that the company must be registered in the Social Security. This process involves two key components. The first one is the NET, which is the company identification number. This is a unique number assigned to a company for its identification with the Social Security to meet its obligation with this system. Then we have the CCC, which is the contribution account code. It's a code that is required for registering employees within the Social Security and track both the company's and the employees' contributions with that administration. Another important legal obligation is to integrate into the company's overall management system a labor risk prevention plan to ensure the health and the safety of all the employees. This plan must be regularly updated whenever there are changes in working conditions or new risks appear or health-related incidents occur. And it is super important to bear in mind that failure to comply with this plan can lead to significant legal and financial penalties. Also, it is important to note that when companies have a physical office or work center, it must be communicated to the Labor Inspectorate and Social Security. Okay, and the final step of a company's onboarding process is the process of hiring and registering an employee. The first step of this process is the drafting of the employment contract, which must be executed in writing and include all the essential terms of the employment relationship. At Lexidy, depending on the company's needs, there are two different types of employment contracts we can prepare. The first one is the official SEPE contract, which is the standard employment contract approved by the Spanish Public Employment Service, and which includes all the essential details of the employment relationship. And alternatively, we can draft a bilingual private contract, which includes all the mandatory information required by the SEPE, but also adds additional clauses adapted to the company's specific circumstances. And it's important to say that this type of contract is especially useful for international contexts or when the company wants to regulate the employment relationship in more detail. Okay, once the employment contract is drafted, it's time to registering the employees within the Social Security. This registration must be done before the employee starts working, as retroactive registrations are not permitted. And the registration grants the employee access to Social Security coverage, including healthcare, sick leave, maternity and paternity benefits, and retirement contributions. Once the employees are registered in Social Security, the employer is responsible for communicating the essential or the required data of the contract to the SEPE. This communication must be done within 10 calendar days following the employee's start date. And this step ensures that the employment relationship is recorded and verified by the authority. Once all these steps have been completed, the employer must include all the employees to the monthly payroll system and apply correct personal income tax withholding and Social Security contributions. This leads us to the next point, which is the ongoing compliance. In Spain, companies must comply with ongoing obligations on a monthly and on a quarterly basis to remain fully compliant with Social Security and tax agency. The first monthly compliance is preparing and paying the monthly payrolls for all employees. It is required that payrolls or salaries are paid on a regular and punctual basis, and the payment must be made before the last working day of each month. However, labor law allows a maximum delay until the 5th day of the following month. Finally, payments must be made through bank transfer, and payslips must be provided to each employee. The other obligation that must be complied on a monthly basis is the submission and the payment of the Social Security contributions. These contributions consist of the employee's contribution, which represents around 6.47% of their gross salary, and the employer's contribution, which represents approximately 32% of the employee's gross salary. In this way, employer must submit and pay both its own contributions and the employee's contributions on their behalf as delegated payment. The payment of these contributions is made by direct debit, and it's charged on the company's bank account on the last working day of the following month. And you have to bear in mind that late payments are subject to surcharges and penalties. Finally, there is the quarter obligations of submitting and payment the personal income tax withholdings of your employees. However, those companies whose annual turnover exceeds 6 million must file these forms on a monthly basis. The payment method in this case depends on the submission date of the forms. If submitted before the 15th of the month, the payment method is direct debit, and if it's submitted between the 16th and the 20th, the payment method is electronic payment. As with Social Security contributions, late payments are subject to surcharges and penalties. And lastly, at the end of the fiscal year, this is in January of the following year, companies must submit the annual summaries of the form submitted quarterly. However, these annual summaries are for information purposes only. Now we will address a series of frequently asked questions that we regularly receive from our clients.
Okay, so one of the most frequently asked questions that we get is whether a foreigner can own 100% of a Spanish limited liability company, a foreigner being either an individual or a foreign company, and the answer is yes, there's no problem. A foreigner can own 100% of a limited liability company in Spain. The second question is, can a foreigner be a director of a Spanish limited liability company? And again, the answer is yes. There's no need to have Spanish citizenship, European citizenship, or even a work permit in Spain to be a director, as long as the person will not be residing in Spain. And the third question, do I need to come to Spain to incorporate my company? As we mentioned during the webinar, there is no need to physically be in Spain, as we can incorporate the company on your behalf via a power of attorney.
Regarding frequently asked questions about payroll, the first one is how much does it cost to hire an employee? And the main cost for a company when hiring an employee in Spain is the Social Security contributions paid by the employer, which, as I've said before, is around 32% of the employee's gross salary. But it is important to bear in mind that this 32% is limited by the maximum contribution base, which for 2025 is set at 4,909.50 euros gross per month. The second question is in how many installments should salaries be paid? And the workers' statute establishes that the annual salary should be distributed in 14 installments. This means 12 regular monthly payments plus 2 extra payments commonly paid in Christmas and summer. However, it is possible to pay the salary in 12 installments. This is prorating the 2 extra payments, but this is only valid if specifically allowed by the collective bargaining agreement applicable to the company. And the last question is, what are the surcharges applied by the Social Security and the tax agency for late payment or non-payment? Regarding Social Security, a 10% surcharge is applied for payments made within 1 month, and a 20% surcharge for payments made after 2 months, along with interest on arrears. And as per the tax agency, there is a progressive surcharge of 1% per month if submitted within 12 months after the deadline, and a 15% surcharge plus interest if submitted after 12 months. Additionally, if the tax agency detects the non-payment and initiates an inspection, the taxpayer will face a serious violation and with fines between 50 and 100% of the unpaid amount, or up to 150% if fraud is involved.
Okay, thank you, Madeleine and Andrea, for these great insights. Let's move on the Q&A session. There are several regarding visa. One of them, Adriana, is asking how long are these visas granted for?
This depends on the visa, but generally it's for 1 year, and then you can renew usually for 2-year periods until you get up to the 5-year mark. Once you get up to the 5-year mark, you can request the long-term residence permit. So then you don't have to renew every year. For the entrepreneur visa, it's a bit different because it depends on ENISA how long it's granted for, but it can be granted for up to 3 years initially, and then you would renew for 2 years until you get to the 5-year mark.
Okay, Amira, how do you renew the business visa, and would it matter if I come in on, say, a business activity visa, then register another company or get a job, etc.? Will that affect the renewal?
Okay, so basically you incorporate a company, request a business visa for that company, and that gets granted, and you're in Spain. Once you're in Spain, you're asking whether the visa will be affected if you don't develop the business activity, but just go and get a normal job. So it will be affected because at the end of the day, you've been granted a visa for a specific activity which you're not rendering. And with renewal, they do look that you have been effectively performing the business activity, and that there has been basically business in Spain. So if you're looking to come to Spain on this sort of visa and then after some time potentially getting a job, then you would need to modify. You would be looking at a visa modification into a different visa type, which would allow you to be an employee, because as we mentioned before, this visa does not allow you to be an employee.
Okay, Amira, and how does this work if the business sells products and not service? For example, selling face creams versus offering consultation services. How does this affect the visa?
There's not that much difference, realistically. I mean, what you really need is a strong business plan and proving that you're taking active steps towards being able to start this business activity, and that all you need is to have the visa to be able to come and work in Spain. So it doesn't matter as much if you're selling products or if you're providing a service. It's how strong your business plan is and whether you're taking active steps to be able to start that process. So, for example, have a website set up, have terms and conditions in place. In some places, we've even seen the authorities request proof of presence on social media. So anything that you might need to be able to render your activity in Spain, that's what they want to see.
Okay, and the last one regarding visa is from Selai. As a foreigner, can we have autonomous freelancer visa since we do not have a residency, and can we apply this with our tourist visa?
Okay, so in this case, it's important to say that the business visa can be applied in 2 ways. So you can apply for the business visa as an autónomo, so you operate in Spain as a freelancer, or you can apply through the incorporation of a company. The issue here is that with the autónomo route, it's less likely for it to be granted just because, as I mentioned beforehand, they're looking for proof that you are taking active steps to be able to start the activity as soon as possible. If you operate as an autónomo, that will simply be, once the visa is granted, registering as an autónomo. It won't be much more. So everything else that you provide will need to be very strong to be able to have that granted. For the company formation route, you'll incorporate the company first, and then with the business plan and all other documents, submit the application. So there will be proof that you've already incorporated the company, and this, of course, is a very strong and important step towards getting the business up and running. So that's why we usually recommend that route, because there's higher chances of success for the visa. That being said, you can, of course, request it as a freelancer. It's just you will need a stronger business plan and more proof of the activity. And regarding whether you can request it in Spain on a tourist visa, you cannot, because this is one of the visas that has to be requested at the Spanish embassy or consulate of your place of residence. So you cannot request this visa from Spain.
Okay, shall I ask too if how long does it take to get a residency visa after we establish the company in Spain?
So once the company is incorporated and you have all of the documents, then documents meaning your own personal documents that are required, business plan, any more proof of the activity, then that will be submitted to the Spanish embassy or consulate of your place of residence. And generally, the Spanish authorities have 3 months to be able to respond to that application. That being said, they don't always keep to this timeline, and it does also depend on which city you're applying for. So, for example, if you're applying for Barcelona, it's currently one of the ones that can take the longest and also ask for more proof, versus other cities that might be a bit faster. But generally, 3 months is the time frame that they have, and normally they can take a bit longer, maybe up to 5 months to respond.
Okay, regarding company formation, we have more questions. I'm both a shareholder and an employee in my current company. We are planning to open a branch or a new company in Spain. What is the best solution for me in terms of taxes and residency?
Okay, so I understand that you refer to the taxes as individual taxes. Your own individual taxes, not the company taxes. In this case, we would need to analyze the structure, as I mentioned. So I understand that you would be interested in the Beckham law regime, which is the beneficial tax regime we mentioned beforehand for individuals. In this case, we would need to see what your percentage is of shareholding and what your role will be in Spain. Because what we usually do in these cases is we analyze your current structure and then we see how we can make the structure in Spain work around the Beckham law regime, if that's the final goal, if that's the most important thing. However, if you're currently, for example, more than a 25% shareholder, then the correct visa would be a business visa. If you have less than 25%, then we can look at an employee visa, which would be a better structure as well regarding the Beckham law.
Okay, going again to a visa question, do we apply to the consulate directly or do we need an ATA approval as well? Someone asks.
So the ATA report, I believe you're referring to, is basically a report that's a request that's made to the authorities here in Spain that help improve chances of approval. So normally my colleagues from the immigration department do help handle the ATA report to be submitted.
Okay, regarding company formation, for a freelancer, do you recommend establish a Spanish resident first and then the business? Asks Adriana.
So in the event you would need a resident permit, a resident and work permit, as I mentioned before, for the business visa, you have either the autónomo or freelancer route or the company formation route. In this case, as I mentioned, if you can go for the company formation route, it is a stronger route to get that business visa, just because you already have the entity incorporated, and that's proof to the authorities that you have a real intention of developing a business activity, and it's not just to be able to get a residence permit for Spain, if you see what I mean. So if you can, then I would go for that route. However, it is important to see exactly what activity you're going to render, because certain activities could be could have to be rendered as a freelancer instead of a company. So we'd need to look at the exact activity and the exact structure. But generally, as a general rule, it's better to incorporate the company first.
Okay, Chad is asking, I'm a legal permanent resident in Spain, no visa issues, and running my online service business via US-based LLC and US bank. I serve a global client base, but most clients reside in the United States. Question, do I need to register in Spain as autonomo? When, if ever, should I consider changing my business to a Spanish SL?
Okay, in this case, this is a complex question basically because when you look at the tax authorities, if you are the sole director of this US company, of the LLC, and you reside in Spain and you operate the business from Spain, and there's not much business structure in the US or anything like that, the authorities will deem that company Spanish. So the problem here is that if the Spanish tax authorities come across your business and they do an analysis and the result is that they deem that your company is Spanish, although it's registered in the US, because the effective management is being done from Spain, the shareholders are in Spain, there's not real business structure in the US, then they could request payment of taxes for the business and different things like that. So it's a bit of a complicated situation, that one, and I would definitely advise checking the structure you have. But if you're gonna stay in Spain and operate from Spain, then it definitely makes sense to move the company here to avoid potential issues down the line. Although all the clients or most of the clients are outside of Spain.
Okay, a question for Andrea. I would be working very part-time. I suppose that is from Lori. I suppose that is a teacher, and said that I would be working very part-time and on a semester-to-semester agreement with no guarantee for a class each semester. There is a salary for the class, but not benefits. And the question is, does my university need to be registered in Spain?
Okay, well, to determine if the university needs to be registered here in Spain, what is essential is to classify the relationship as either labor-based or commercial. Um, in, if the relationship is labor-based, the university must be registered in Spain to obtain the tax ID and a social security contribution code. And if the relationship is commercial, a permanent established is not required, but the university may still need a Spanish NIF to meet withholding tax obligations.
Okay, another question from Amira regarding visa. How much money do we need to be making to get the visa for both product company and service visa?
I'm not sure what you refer to with product company or services visa. Basically, the visa will still be the business visa, whether it's a product company or services company. But in any case, the money that is required, there's no specific amount per se. It's more that you have sufficient funds to be able to support yourself in Spain and also to be able to support your business. So obviously, when you do the business plan, there will be financial projections, there will be projections on how much money you require for this. So that will be what will determine how much money is needed.
Okay, and Selai is asking, can we open the company with two context codes, for instance, trade and consultancy? They may see two different businesses.
Yeah, there's no problem. I mean, a lot of companies use one entity for two different activities, and there's no problem with that. It does get to a point. I mean, usually there is one stronger activity than the other. So you would have a main activity or main code and then a secondary one. And then sometimes it does get to a point where both activities have grown enough to make sense to then separate them into different companies. But to start off, of course, if you're a growing business, then you can include them both in one company.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? Stella, can you repeat your question, please? I know, sorry. No, okay. It seems that there are no more questions. Thank you all for joining and for your participation. I hope this first session gave you a clear view of how to set up your business in Spain. As a thank you for attending, you will receive a link to book a free 15 minutes meeting call with our team, so you can tell us about your project and get some personal advice. You will also get an email invitation soon for our next session on November 6th, focused on taxation, accounting, and financial management, as well as the recording of today's webinar. We hope to see you again in our next session. Thank you.